They broke through the bricks, and there he was, Scout, barely breathing but alive. The impossible had happened. But how had he survived without food or light for months? How did he know Noah's scent? And why did Noah whisper his name before anyone had even spoken it aloud? Each answer brought only more questions, each moment closer to a truth no one had dared to imagine. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Autumn had come early to the hills of Whispering Pines, a quiet mountain town tucked in the heart of Colorado. The first frost arrived like a ghost, brushing the pine needles silver and turning the breath of dawn into ribbons of white mist. A narrow gravel road wound up the eastern ridge where a weathered log cabin stood, half forgotten under a canopy of birch and fir. The cabin's windows wore the dust of neglect, and its wooden siding bore the scars of time and mountain storms. It was into this creaking old house that Sarah Blake and her 5-year-old son Noah had just moved. Sarah was a tall, slender woman in her early 30s with tired green eyes that once sparkled but now held a distant, guarded pain. Her dark brown hair, once flowing and vibrant, was usually tied in a low, practical ponytail. She had the posture of someone who carried too much weight on invisible shoulders, shoulders bent not by labor, but by grief. Sarah had worked as a night shift nurse for nearly a decade, known for her calm under pressure and her quiet warmth with patients. But since the day her eldest son Caleb vanished without a trace during a summer hike a year ago, Sarah had changed. She smiled less. She avoided mirrors. Her kindness remained, but it had become more clinical, restrained, as if any extra softness might reopen the raw wound she tried to bandage inside her chest. Noah Blake, her younger son, was 5, but often mistaken for older. He had a mop of wheat blonde hair that always seemed too wild to tame, and wide gray-blue eyes that held a strange sort of depth for a child. He was curious, intensely so, and had a habit of speaking to things others could not see. Tree roots, cracks in the floor, shadows that moved when no one else noticed. Since the loss of Caleb, Noah had grown quieter but no less imaginative. He carried a small, battered notebook with him everywhere, filling it with drawings that never made sense to Sarah. Spirals, eyes, animal tracks, and strange half-faces staring from behind walls. The cabin had been a last-minute purchase, something Sarah could afford on her nurse's salary after they left Denver. It was remote, peaceful, and broken in ways that made it easier to live inside. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with history. Sarah called it, far enough from memory, on their first night in the house. The wind whispered through the pine trees with a voice like a forgotten lullaby. Noah had gone to bed early, curled under a blanket covered in faded dinosaurs. Sarah tucked him in gently, brushing a kiss onto his forehead, and then sat by the fire with a cup of peppermint tea and one of Caleb's old journals, a book filled with notes and sketches about his dream of training search and rescue dogs. By 2:17 a.m., the cabin was silent. That was when Noah awoke. He sat bolt upright, breath caught in his chest, fingers gripping his blanket. The red numbers of the clock blinked in the dark, casting a faint glow across the room. There was a sound, not loud, not constant, but real. It wasn't wind, nor the creaking of wood. It was a whimper, faint, raspy, muffled. Noah turned his head slowly toward the far wall, the one facing the back of the house, just above the basement. His small feet hit the cold wooden floor as he slid out of bed and padded across the room. He placed his ear against the wall. The sound came again. A low, desperate whine. "Hello," Noah whispered. Pressing his palm flat against the surface, the sound paused. Then, after a moment, it returned. Softer, but insistent. "You're stuck." "Aren't you?" he asked quietly, as though speaking to a trapped bird or frightened squirrel. He didn't know how he knew it, but the noise was not from a ghost or pipe. It was from a dog. A dog crying in the dark. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window where Sarah stood making instant oatmeal. Her long fingers trembled slightly as she stirred, her mind somewhere far from the mountains. She wore a gray hoodie and navy sweatpants, hair hastily knotted at the back of her neck. Noah shuffled into the room, still in his pajamas, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Did you sleep okay, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, glancing up. "No," he said seriously. "There's a dog in the wall." Sarah froze. Spoon midair. "What, there's a dog crying?" Noah repeated. "She's scared. She's stuck behind my wall. She needs water." Sarah blinked, then set the spoon down and smiled. "But it was forced, honey. That's probably just the house settling. Old houses make strange noises." "No," Noah insisted. "It's real. She talks different. Not like people, but I hear her." Sarah crouched and touched his forehead, then cupped his cheeks gently. "I think you had a bad dream." Noah frowned. "I didn't, I promise." They sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Later that day, while Sarah unpacked kitchen boxes, Noah tiptoed back into his room with a small bowl of water and a cracker. He placed them on the floor next to the wall and whispered, "I brought something. I hope it helps." That night, Sarah found him asleep on the floor, one hand still touching the baseboard. She carried him to bed, sighing, but her eyes lingered on the wall for just a moment longer than necessary. That same evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge and painted the forest in shades of ash and gold, Sarah sat at the kitchen table flipping through Caleb's journal. On one page, scribbled in pencil beside a drawing of a German shepherd, were the words, "The best dogs never bark when they're scared. They wait, and wait, and wait." Sarah closed the book slowly. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and the faintest echo of something lost trying to be heard. The next morning, in Whispering Pines, dawned overcast and hushed, with clouds sagging low over the treetops like woolen blankets. Sarah Blake stood at the kitchen sink, arms deep in suds, trying to ignore the silence that stretched between her and the world. Outside, a squirrel darted across the porch railing, and frost still clung to the tips of the grass. Inside the cabin, the heater grumbled to life, stirring a faint warmth into the cold wood. Noah was unusually quiet. He sat at the small dining table, hunched over a sheet of paper with a fistful of crayons in hand. His tongue peeked out of the corner of his mouth as he concentrated, shading in lines, erasing, then redrawing. The image forming beneath his fingers was unsettling. A dog curled in darkness, its amber eyes glowing with a lifelike sadness that seemed far too complex for a 5-year-old to imagine. Around it were odd shapes, jagged wood, spirals of black, and what looked like vent slats. Sarah tried not to look. The move was supposed to be a reset, a quiet retreat after Caleb's death had broken something permanent in her. But Noah had grown stranger since they arrived, last night. He insisted again that there was a dog behind his bedroom wall, that it needed help, that it was waiting. Sarah blamed the trauma. Noah had been close to Caleb, idolized him, even, and Caleb had loved dogs. The connection seemed too obvious, too symbolic. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that her son wasn't just pretending. Later that morning, Sarah decided to sort through more of Caleb's belongings, tucked in a cardboard box labeled Caleb, Personal, sitting cross-legged in the living room. She opened the box and found what she remembered: his old whistle, worn notebooks, and a fleece hoodie with a search and rescue patch sewn awkwardly on the sleeve. At the bottom was a spiral-bound notepad, its corners bent with use. Flipping through it, Sarah found pages filled with Caleb's tight, impatient handwriting. One page caught her attention: hand-sketched diagrams of hand signals, body postures, and coded marks, some of which looked almost like ancient glyphs. Caleb had labeled them non-verbal communication methods, canine response. But what froze her blood was one simple drawing of a paw next to a wall with faint lines radiating outward, like sound or energy. Underneath, he had written, "Sometimes they're behind something, but still listening." That afternoon, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find an elderly man standing on the porch, leaning heavily on a worn cedar walking stick. He was in his 70s, tall but bent, with a face lined by sun and wind. His beard was silver and short, and his eyes were alert but shadowed, like someone who had learned to listen more than speak. "Name's Everett, lived 2 lots down, figured I'd welcome the new folks," he said with a slight smile. Sarah offered a polite one in return. "Thanks. I'm Sarah. My son Noah's inside," as Everett stepped into the living room. His gaze immediately caught the drawing Noah had pinned to the fridge. He froze mid-step. Where'd this come from? Sarah looked over. Noah drew it this morning. He's been saying odd things about a dog. Everett stepped closer, studying the image. "That's Scout. You know the dog I knew of her," Everett said carefully. "Belonged to Ronald Wade, the man who lived here before you. Bit of a recluse. Used to walk her every evening up the ridge trail. Smart dog, protective. Then, about 8 months ago, both of them disappeared. No forwarding address. None. Just gone. Mail piled up. Someone from town called the sheriff eventually. They checked the place. Didn't find anything. Figured he skipped town." Sarah crossed her arms, and the dog Scout never turned up. Noah padded into the room just then, clutching another drawing. This one was simpler. Just 2 eyes peering from behind wooden slats. Everett stared. That dog had eyes just like that, not just the color, but the way she looked at you, like she understood more than she should. Sarah bent down. "Noah, how did you know her eyes looked like that?" The boy shrugged. "She showed me." Everett's expression darkened. "Ma'am, might sound strange, but that dog meant something to Ronald. He didn't have family, barely had friends. Only thing he talked about in town was how he found Scout as a pup, wandering the woods after a snowstorm." Sarah hesitated. "You think something happened to him?" Here Everett didn't answer directly. "All I know is, folks don't just vanish, and loyal dogs don't run off without a trace." That night, after Everett had gone, Sarah found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, Caleb's notebook open on her lap. She flipped back to the symbol of the wall and the paw. Noah had drawn it. 2, nearly identical. But he'd never seen this page. She closed the book and set it beside her, then glanced at the hallway where Noah slept, dreaming of things buried in darkness. The next morning brought no sun, only the slow hiss of sleet as it slicked the trees and soaked the earth with a bone-deep chill. The cabin felt colder than usual despite the wood stove burning steadily in the corner. Sarah stood at the threshold of the basement door, one hand on the handle, the other clutching Caleb's old notebook. Her knuckles were pale. Something inside her had shifted overnight, not a leap of faith, but a slow turn toward believing that what Noah felt, saw, and heard might not just be echoes of grief. Sarah Blake was a woman both composed and hollowed, 38, tall and slender with sharp cheekbones and tired green eyes that once danced with curiosity. She had spent most of the last year buried in numbness since Caleb's death. A trauma nurse by training. She'd once been admired for her steady hands and relentless composure. But Caleb's drowning during a field trip just minutes before she arrived to pick him up shattered something essential. Since then, her warmth was reserved solely for Noah. To the rest of the world, even kindness felt like performance. That morning, she called Everett. The old man arrived in his navy parka and brown work gloves, eyes narrowed against the freezing mist. He still leaned on his cedar stick but moved faster than expected for someone his age. "What is it?" he asked as he stepped through the door. Sarah motioned to the basement. "I want to check something. There's a patch of wall behind Noah's room that feels wrong. I know it sounds strange, but he keeps talking about a dog behind the wall, and yesterday," she paused, embarrassed, "I felt something. A vibration, subtle, but real." Everett grunted. "Let's take a look." The basement had always carried a heavy silence, but now it felt oppressive, like the very air resisted them. The walls were old stone in most parts, except for one corner, clean brickwork, newer, too even, too smooth. Sarah ran her fingers over it. "This wasn't in the original house plans," she said, gesturing toward an old blueprint she had found rolled in a closet. Everett stepped forward and knocked. The sound rang dull, hollow. Someone sealed something with a crowbar he'd brought. Everett wedged into the mortar line. Bits of grit fell to the floor. Sarah flinched at every groan of the wall, as if afraid of what they might awaken. After 20 minutes of prying, one brick gave way. A chill drifted out, like the breath of something long forgotten. Then a sound. Not loud, not sharp, just a whisper of breath. A slow exhale. Sarah staggered backward, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Everett didn't answer. His face was grim. They worked faster after that. Silently, more bricks came free, and the hole deepened. A foul, musky scent emerged, something between rot and fur. Then, through the dust and shadow, a shape shifted. The flashlight beam landed on a tangle of limbs, matted fur, gaunt ribs, and eyes, amber eyes, cloudy but burning with will. It was a German shepherd, barely alive, crumpled into a narrow compartment barely large enough to lie down. The dog didn't whimper, didn't bark, just stared. Sarah dropped to her knees, heart pounding. "My God," she whispered, "he's still alive." Everett knelt beside her. "That's Scout," he said hoarsely. No doubt. They moved fast, blankets, water, a shallow bowl of broth heated over the stove. Sarah's years in emergency medicine returned in force as she examined the dog's spine. Hips and ribs. Every bone protruded like scaffolding beneath skin. His fur was dark sable, grizzled with gray around the muzzle. One ear stood upright, the other torn and drooped slightly. As she lifted him gently from the cavity, he trembled but didn't resist. His paws were stiff, nails cracked and overgrown. The collar he wore was caked in grime, the name tag scratched but still legible. Scout. They laid him beside the fire, wrapped in towels. Noah watched wide-eyed from across the room, clutching something in his hands. It was Caleb's hoodie. Scout's head turned sharply, nose twitching. Then a low growl bubbled in his throat, not hostile, more confused. He stared at the hoodie as if remembering something. Then his body tensed, and he tried to rise, legs shaking. Sarah rushed forward to hold him steady. Noah stepped back. He doesn't like it. No, Sarah murmured. He remembers it. Everett furrowed his brow. What do you mean? Sarah didn't answer. She took the hoodie, now frayed and faded, and held it closer to the firelight. There, near the hem, almost invisible, were two initials in blue marker. C.B. Caleb Blake. Scout's eyes locked on her, then flicked to Noah and then back again, wide and alert. It was not a random reaction, it was recognition. That night. Sarah sat beside Scout, checking his breathing every hour. She had already called the nearest vet clinic in town, but it would take until morning for someone to arrive. Still, the dog, somehow, held on. Noah curled up beside the hearth, drawing quietly again. This time, he sketched Scout, but not behind bars. He drew the dog wrapped in blankets, firelight flickering across his fur, eyes half closed, and in the corner of the drawing, a faint shadow of a boy with a hoodie, watching. Morning came with a brittle stillness, as if the forest surrounding the cabin was holding its breath. A thin layer of frost rimmed the windows, and the fields beyond the tree line shimmered in silver quietude. Scout lay curled on a nest of blankets near the hearth, his breathing shallow but steady. The scent of wet fur and antiseptic still clung to the air from the night before. Sarah paced, her long frame stiff from worry, arms crossed tightly as she glanced from her phone to the clock and back again. The vet was late when the knock finally came. It was firm and quick. Dr. Emily Carr was a woman in her late 30s, short and wiry, with dark curly hair pulled into a loose bun and a smudge of ink always somewhere on her hands, a leftover habit from sketching medical diagrams during long nights at university. She wore a puffy red vest over scrubs, and her expression combined clinical calm with something softer. Concern, maybe, or instinct. This is the dog, she asked gently, kneeling beside Scout. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, reflexes, gums. She frowned. He's badly dehydrated, emaciated, muscle atrophy in the limbs, but no open wounds or broken bones. Sarah crouched beside her. Anxiety etched deep into her voice. Is he going to make it? Emily hesitated. By every textbook I've ever studied, he shouldn't even be alive. Trapped like that, with no food or clean water for weeks, months. Maybe there must have been just enough moisture seeping in. Or, she looked up. He chose to live for something at that moment. Noah wandered into the room, still in pajamas, dragging Caleb's faded hoodie in one hand, as soon as he crossed the threshold. Scout lifted his head, weakly, but with purpose. His tail gave the slightest thump. Emily blinked. He responded. Noah knelt beside him, resting his small hand on Scout's paw. His name is Scout, he said simply. Emily glanced at Sarah, who looked stunned. Did someone tell him? No, Sarah whispered. We just read the tag this morning. He wasn't in the room. Emily studied the boy more closely now. Have you met this dog before? Noah. He shook his head. But he came in my dreams, and he's been trying to talk. Scout's eyes never left Noah as the boy rested against him. The dog's breathing grew slower, more even. Emily stood, murmuring, This isn't just trauma response, there's something deeper here. Later that afternoon, at the veterinary clinic on the edge of town, Scout was hooked up to fluids in a quiet corner suite. The building itself was modest, 2 exam rooms, a surgery wing, and a small recovery area painted in muted greens and soft browns. Sarah sat in the waiting area, sipping bad coffee and staring at the tiled floor while Noah sat nearby with his sketchbook. He'd been quiet since they arrived, focused. An hour passed. Then he tore out a page and brought it over. It was a map. Simple and childlike, lines for roads, trees like green lollipops, and a red X marked just past a bend in the creek. There were small boxes labeled Cabin, River Rock, and one marked Trap. Emily returned, wiping her hands. Scout's stable, weak, but stronger than he was this morning. His vitals are climbing. Sarah nodded distractedly, eyes on the drawing. Noah, what is this? He pointed. It's where Caleb went before he stopped talking to me. Sarah stiffened. Noah, Caleb died at the lake. Noah shook his head. Not before he went here. Scout remembers it. Emily knelt, sweetheart. How do you know Noah looked up at her? Wide-eyed but calm. Scout shows me things when I sleep. Pictures, sounds. Sometimes, Caleb is there. Emily glanced again at Sarah, who now sat very still. Something inside her had been unspooling since the moment Scout was pulled from the wall, and it now threatened to unravel completely as Sarah drove them home. The roads were slick with fresh sleet, and the trees loomed like silent witnesses. Noah sat quietly in the back seat, humming under his breath. The drawing rested in Sarah's lap. Later that night, Sarah rummaged through a bin of Caleb's belongings. There, folded in the back of a box, she found a copy of a report, one Caleb had written himself, tucked beneath a notebook on dog training techniques. The report was addressed to a local ranger's office and dated 6 weeks before his death. It spoke of illegal hunting signs, traps found near the creek bend, carcasses half buried, strange noises at night. The name Ronald Wade was scribbled in the margin with a question mark. She stared at it, the air thick with implication, back at the clinic. Scout stirred in his sleep. His ears twitched. Tail gave one soft beat against the cushion. Emily, watching from the monitor, made a note in her file. Dog exhibits emotional response only in proximity to child, potential trauma imprint or deeper bond. As she closed her laptop, a gentle knock came from the front. It was Officer Dale Parsons, a local sheriff's deputy in his 50s with gray-blonde hair and a deep voice lined with too many cigarettes. He had received Sarah's message. We might want to reopen the file on Caleb Blake. Sarah had told him earlier. There's something we missed. The first thaw of spring had barely begun to soften the forest floor when Sarah, Noah, and Officer Parsons followed the trail leading into the northern edge of the Iron Hollow Woods. The trees, tall and skeletal, still bore winter's hush, but something in the air had shifted, like the breath before a confession. Scout padded quietly alongside Noah, his gait steadier with each passing day, though his ribs still pressed like knuckles beneath his fur. His eyes, though, carried a clarity that hadn't been there the night he was pulled from the wall, a purpose. Officer Dale Parsons led the way, his heavy boots crunching through old pine needles and the thawing snow crust. A seasoned man in his late 50s with a lined face and wide shoulders. Dale was not easily stirred, but the combination of Scout's survival and the child's eerie accuracy had cracked something deep in his skepticism. He glanced back occasionally at Noah, who clutched a folded map in one hand and Caleb's old hoodie in the other, as if the fabric still held its older brother's guidance. Sarah followed close behind, her tall frame wrapped in a worn wool coat, auburn hair tied back, face pale but focused. Ever since she'd read the report Caleb had filed, the one buried beneath years of grief, her nights had been filled with Caleb's voice, half memories and guilt. Guilt that she hadn't believed sooner. Guilt that her son had been speaking truths she wasn't ready to hear. After nearly an hour's hike, they reached it, a half-collapsed cabin hunched at the base of a slope, swallowed by brambles and shadow. The porch leaned precariously, its roof sunken on one side, and the windows were darkened with grime. A faded sign above the doorway, nearly illegible, read, "Wade." Scout froze, his ears pricked. His body lowered slightly, not in fear but recognition. A soft whine escaped him. Then, without hesitation, he trotted toward the broken steps and pressed his nose to the door. Parsons lifted his flashlight. "We'll enter carefully inside." The air was stale with mildew and something older, neglect, perhaps. Dust coated every surface. Animal traps lined the walls, their sharp teeth rusted open. A workbench was scattered with old dog collars, most of them frayed or scorched, but it was the far corner that drew Scout there. Beneath a tarp and piles of blankets was a locked chest. Noah stepped forward. "He says it's in there," he said, without a shred of doubt. Parsons forced it open with a crowbar. Inside were two things: a collection of water-damaged notebooks and a stack of DVDs labeled with permanent marker. Scout, Trial Day, 1, Caleb, Fieldwork, Do Not Erase. They returned to the veterinary clinic to view the footage. Dr. Emily Carr made the room in her office, where the scent of rubbing alcohol mingled with the hum of old electronics. She inserted the first disc, and the screen blinked into color. Caleb appeared. He looked younger than Sarah remembered him in his final months. His face was full, eyes bright, standing beside a young German shepherd, a Scout. The video showed Caleb running exercises, teaching hand signals, and rewarding Scout with praise, but as the clips progressed, the background darkened. One clip caught a frantic exchange between Caleb and an unseen figure. A gravelly voice, paranoid, panicked, shouted about spies, secrets, betrayal. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Parsons leaned forward. "That's Ronald Wade's voice." The final clip showed Caleb trying to leave with Scout. The frame shook, and Caleb's voice called out, "Scout, run," before the camera fell sideways. Static filled the room. Emily turned off the monitor. No one spoke for a long time. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Noah, her hand resting over his. He tried to save him. She whispered. Noah nodded. He still does. Scout, lying nearby, lifted his head and wagged his tail once, in the days that followed. A quiet transformation began. Word spread quickly in the small town that Caleb Blake had died not just wandering but trying to rescue a dog, that his instincts, always dismissed as too soft, had been right. Sarah donated Caleb's notebooks and training manuals to the local shelter, and with the town's support and Emily's expertise, they began plans for a new space. Caleb's shelter. It would be a therapy center for rescued animals and children alike, a place where unspoken things could be heard. Just as Noah had heard them, Scout, now fully recovered, became the shelter's first certified therapy dog. His calm presence soothed nervous hands. His gaze anchored restless hearts, with Noah at his side. He helped children who had stopped speaking, veterans who flinched at loud noises, and elders who had forgotten how to smile. And Noah, still only 5, became known around town as the boy who listened. Sometimes he would sit silently by a cage, sketching something only he could see. Other times he'd whisper to a new arrival and declare its name before anyone had spoken it aloud, Emily once said, half joking. It's like Caleb passed on his gift. Sarah, standing at the shelter's ribbon cutting, looked out at the crowd gathered around. She was no longer the hollowed-out figure of grief she'd been months before. She stood straighter now, her voice steadier, the warmth in her smile no longer rehearsed. For the first time since Caleb's death, she felt something like peace. That night, after the last guest had gone, Sarah sat beside Scout on the porch of the shelter, watching the stars emerge like slow flickering embers. Noah curled nearby, asleep against Scout's side. Sarah looked at the dog, then at the boy. "Thank you," she said softly, not just to Scout, but to the wind, the woods, to something beyond words. Scout thumped his tail once in reply. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder and lightning, they come softly, through the whisper of a wall, the loyalty of a forgotten dog, or the unshakable faith of a child. Scout's survival, Noah's gift, and the truth about Caleb remind us that even in the darkest places, God's hand is still at work. There are moments when love speaks not through words, but through instinct, courage, and quiet acts of redemption. This story reminds us that God's grace can shine even through broken things, through trauma, loss, and silence, and turn them into healing in our everyday lives. We might not see cement walls or lost cabins, but we all walk past someone hiding pain or a soul longing to be seen. Let us listen. Let us believe. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, faith, and redemption. Write Amen in the comments if you believe God still sends His messengers in unexpected forms, even in the eyes of a child or the heart of a wounded dog. May God bless you and protect the silent prayers you carry.